And welcome back. Jose Otero here with Per Schneider.
Hey, Jose.
And we are joined by two special guests this week. So we are here with the writer and artist of Second Quest. Second Quest is a comic which you can check out online by visiting www.secondquestcomic.com. It was kickstarted in November 2012 by 1,594 backers. So we have with us Tevis Thompson, who wrote it, and David Hellman, who is the artist. Folks may also know some of David's work from, you worked on Braid, if I understand, and you also had another graphic novel you worked on as well.
This is my first graphic novel, but I did a webcomic called A Lesson is Learned, but the Damage is Irreversible with writer Dale Buran.
Okay, cool. And Tevis's work is also on the internet. I know that you've done some work for Grantland in the past, I believe. You had a really strong essay on saving Zelda, which we will get to at some point as well. Cool, awesome. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So give folks sort of the pitch on Second Quest. Like, what is it? What is sort of the overall story that you were aiming for here?
Well, it started when we played Skyward Sword and were left feeling dissatisfied, I guess, by the experience. And Tevis wrote an excellent essay called Saving Zelda that summarized how a lot of people felt, I think. You want to say anything about Saving Zelda?
Yeah, we didn't know each other before that.
Okay,
so
got it.
I wrote an essay, and then the magic of the internet and Twitter, I guess, brought us together. But I'd played it, and actually I'd played Demon's Souls that fall. That was pivotal because, you know, when you play something, it disappoints you, maybe you don't want to write about that. But then I also played something that inspired me. Demon's Souls was a big thing to me.
Yeah.
So anyway, that kind of led to that essay, and it was just all about not just Skyward Sword, but how I felt the series had kind of declined over time. And so it went through some of that, and then we just started talking after that. And,
Who reached out to who exactly?
I reached out to you, I think, and I did a landscape drawing because I just felt inspired by Tevis's essay. So right away we were kind of doing art together. I felt like, I want to somehow express what I really, what I'm really looking for in the Zelda game, that sense of exploration and free adventure that I didn't ever quite get to playing Skyward Sword. I always felt like it was right around the next corner, but I was never left alone to really have true discoveries. So it started with this landscape drawing, and then we started discussing doing a short comic to kind of convert the ideas in the essay into something like in a narrative form. And it ended up being a 102-page graphic novel.
It was one page at the beginning. I had a one-page idea.
First of all, I think, the irony that Skyward Sword wasn't that inspirational, but then inspired you guys to do this is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But and when you started this project, though, did you think, were you first thinking about doing something that is on the nose? It's Legend of Zelda, and it's like you're telling a story in that universe, or did you always think you wanted to do something that reminds people of it? It's a reference, but not a true Zelda story.
Well, it actually started as more of a Zelda story, and it evolved to the point that it's not a Zelda story, though if you know Zelda, you'll see a lot in there that has particular meaning. But I think the initial idea was to kind of reframe the story from Skyward Sword in a way that would foreground our actual read of it, which is different from how it seemed to want to be received. That is, the way it wants you to feel is that, you become a hero and that Zelda has made meaningful sacrifices to take her,
Goddess form.
Her goddess form and accept her destiny and in this role play that is repeated throughout the series. But instead, it didn't feel the way I think they wanted us to. Instead, I was struck by how kind of interesting Zelda is at the beginning and how she ends up being completely
silenced. She was better drawn at the beginning of the game when she's up there, on the island, and other Zeldas haven't. I mean, they've done some stuff with her, but she felt like a real girl basically. And then once she got sucked into a tornado and all that and embraced her destiny, she went into like a crystal, was silent. They always go that she goes to sleep or she goes,
There's the weird bit where she's like, I have to go purify my body in the springs. She's wearing a white gown.
It felt like a cult to us.
Yeah, it was very culty.
Yeah. And you have, a lot of the elements it feels very ritualistic, like the people of your universe here keep on reliving the same story over and over.
That's right. And they only want it told a certain way.
Yeah.
Right.
And that is, I think, a cornerstone of the Zelda games, the way they've been iterated, and it's so self-referential and reverential, and I think a lot of fans expect that and want that, want it to be kind of retold very faithfully, and it's upheld as a virtue, but it feels stifling to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that goes into the territory of your essay, obviously, and we should talk a little bit about that as well. But yeah, I mean, I first of all, I love the book. It's really cool.
Thank you.
So folks, if you want to order it, where can you find this? Like, you can get it online.
SecondQuestComic.com.
And you can get hard copy and digital.
Digital.
Right?
Yeah.
Fangamer. There's a link there to Fangame where they do the hard copy, but you can get the digital right there.
Yeah, you should check it out. We're not going to give away what happens in the book, but it's a really cool story.
Especially if you're a Zelda fan, you owe it to yourself to check it out.
But it's also like, if you know the background of your essay and ultimately your dissatisfaction with Skyward Sword, I think takes on a new meaning. I mean, I think Zelda fans are instantly going to spot the references, like the pig thief and all these characters.
Yeah, that's right.
But I really like that kind of additional level where you guys criticize the direction of the franchise, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. But do you think some of those elements, that sort of the self-referential nature of it all, do you guys think that part of it is just sort of the trap of being a franchise? Do you think it's the trap of just, the expectations that come with Zelda? I mean, I always struggle with how someone can get around them. You know what I mean?
I don't think you can play video games without, like, basically embracing a sequel mentality, right?
That's
because every game, even games that are not named sequels, the whole process of making games is iterative, and so you have these mechanics that are just, they're sequels to other games that you don't even think about being.
That's
so
right.
It's we were thinking about specifically Zelda, but we were trying to broaden and think about modern gaming and think about the whole experience of a franchise, because someone who started with Skyward Sword, that's their first Zelda, then that's a totally different experience. If you've played all of them since like 1987,
that's right.
Then that's I guess for us what I don't get are the new fans. I understand why they might enjoy it in a different way than I do, but people who've played it all their lives, I'm like, aren't you tired? Like,
Well, you're asking us, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we're still playing them. We can talk about that. But your point is, like, if you look at a franchise like Halo, for example, I mean, the developer can make the decision to take one of the guns and make it feel different in the next game, and they will probably upset 90% of their fan base. Or they can say, all right, we got to make sure the pistol feels exactly the same way, causes the same damage. And I think with Legend of Zelda, you've got this, you've got this interesting dilemma where it's like, you walk around the overworld and you see a hookshot target, and that means different things to different people. To my daughter, who may never have played a 3D Zelda game before,
Sure.
She goes, I don't know what that is. That's cool. And walks past. I go, ooh, there's a hook shot in the game. So now I'm going to remember that I have to come back here, right? And it raises the expectations. But I'm with you. I do think, over time, apart from the kind of sense of freedom, obviously, that you talk about, too, that's kind of lost, where you can't really go everywhere. Skyward Sword's almost a side-scroller in a way, right? Like, but there is not enough new to actually surprise you, where it doesn't feel like everything you see, like you almost already know the solution to everything you see as a trained gamer now.
Right. Yeah.
And I do think, though, different people react differently to that too. Like, some people are happy with the familiar and are excited about what lies ahead, and they dream of getting this item that they know will unlock this. But some other people, like you, will go, well, same story, different game, and same tool, so I already know what's coming next.
And
right?
it seems like with Zelda in particular, it purports to be an adventure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I'm not trying to harp on what an adventure is, but I understand money games have familiar stuff that you just, it's like comfort food, and you enjoy that. But for an adventure, I just don't think you can call it an adventure if you've been on it before.
Sure.
I mean,
but that's the point of the franchise too, right? Like, the hero is reborn.
I know.
The repetition is one issue, maybe, but there's also just the hand-holding is the shorthand, I guess, for it. But I mean, don't you want to be set free in a world and allowed to take some risks and allowed to screw it up and get killed, and then think, wow, I can't believe I got to that crazy place and I don't think I was supposed to be there. That would happen in the first Zelda. It happens in games like Dark Souls, where you can stumble into, some really dangerous area and die and think, oh my God, like, when am I going to be able to conquer that? Right. Or maybe you're a good enough player that you can dodge around the Lionels, or whatever they call it, throwing the swords, and you can like survive for a while in the mountains and feel really cool because you can do it. But Skyward Sword, it's like instead of creating an interesting system with good rules and allowing the game to evolve out of the rules and the space they give you, it feels so concerned with maximizing your entertainment at every point and giving you something new at every step that it never leaves you alone, and it's just so overbearing. Like so, and
Fi is especially true of that. Just in agreement.
Well, and the setup of the world is not, you're not free to go where you want, right? I mean, it's
we focused on Fi, but I think that she just voices what the world's telling you at every turn.
Yeah,
that's right.
The world is constantly signaling to you, and they're very good at that. I mean, Nintendo gets all the details right. They know how to direct your attention and stuff like that, but you can feel it, and it begins to feel like chains. Or
there's a scene in Twilight Princess where you're going down the river, and I think you've just gotten the bomb arrows or something. It's been a while since I did this, but you can fire explosive arrows, and you have to blow up the boulders that are in the way so you can continue down the river. And I noticed that if you fire your arrow at the boulder before the Zora character has appeared and said, "Hey, why don't you fire your arrow at that?" the boulder won't blow up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And it's just probably a bug or an oversight, but the fact that they script it so carefully that to them the experience is someone tells you to blow up the boulder and then you do it and then you feel good that you've done it or something, instead of, I mean, the system doesn't even work. Like if the boulder doesn't blow up until a fish guy says blow it up,
and that makes the world not feel real.
But why do you think? So and I don't want to misrepresent your opinion, because in your essay you also talk about how refreshing it was to have the world of Wind Waker, for example, right? Like, the games are obviously not all alike. Majora's Mask has a completely different game system, which I thought was just so refreshing when I first played it. There's some elements that are definitely repeated. By the way, I'm not a Skyward Sword hater. I enjoyed it a lot, but I enjoyed it for its weird kind of like Studio Ghibli quirkiness and weird characters. And and honestly, like I thought Zelda was really fully realized in the beginning. I really liked that character. I really liked the storyline with Impa. I dug that. But as an overworld, I thought it was not successful, and it was very handholdy.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the success with Zelda at the beginning is part of where the disappointment for us, like later on. You remember like the credit sequence? You get to see kind of what she was doing.
Yes,
all the time.
I remember that.
And that just kind of sparked our imagination. Like, wow, we wanted to go on that. So what was she doing all that time? But the game doesn't really care about that.
But why do you think Nintendo ended up in this place where it is much more about signaling? I mean, the games now start and you pick up a rupee and it goes, "Hold on, Buster, this one's worth 10," that, which is kind of ridiculous, because the game should be able to tell you how many rupees you get just by that counter going on, right?
Yes, absolutely.
But how do you think they ended up with that system? You think it's just because they want to target the game towards like the broadest possible audience, so they kind of stuck between returning player and new player, or
You can just speculate, but I think they really want to make an entertaining game. And I mean, they're great craftspeople. I mean, like, there's always something great in all these games. There's always something that is like so well put together, so imaginative. But and I loved Link Between the Worlds, by the way. I thought that was a big improvement. I really enjoyed it. I just want to see them. I want to see the people taking care of this franchise. And my opinion only matters, so far. I mean, they can do what they want. They're creators. But I want to see them being what I think is creatively healthy. And I mean that in like a really encouraging way. Like, I feel like there's some timidity that makes them kind of hold back and kind of defeat the whole purpose of the game.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, what causes that, right?
Because Nintendo's a strange company in that they can be the most innovative and the most conservative, right? So they seem to have like different moods they go through, and even over the systems, like the Nintendo. If I think back to like the sequels to the Nintendo games, right? So like Zelda 2, Castlevania 2, Mario 2, even when they decided to do the American version of it, those were very different games. They weren't reiterations of the first game. But then the Super Nintendo, as many great games as they had, Link to the Past was really like a kind of a redo of the first game. A very much more polished one. Super Metroid was a redo of the first. Super Mario World was and so they were great games, but they were also like that. The Super Nintendo to me is like a safer system. Then the Nintendo 64 went in some crazier directions, and didn't have as many games, but had some amazing ones. So I don't know. Nintendo's like a weird company, and I don't know. I can't imagine what kind of brings that out of them. What gets them in the safe mode, success seems to breed safety a little bit. And like when they get down, when you push them in a corner and they fight back, and then something like cool comes out.
Yeah.
But they succeeded with the Wii, so
And I think they're very focused on generating emotions with the game systems themselves, right? Like before Skyward Sword, it was never about watching a cutscene going like, oh yeah, I feel so good that I rescued her or something like that. It was more about the accomplishment of getting something and the way they signal to you that you did something good. And like sometimes, a boss fight in a Zelda game can be so freaking easy. There's some where you're like, what? That was it? Really 3 hits? But then you open the treasure chest and they make a really big deal out of you getting that. And then you get an item, you're like, oh, that's cool because I remember using this in 2 games ago and I'm so happy to have it back. And like, you do feel good. But what you're describing is kind of like the Demon Souls effect, where like a boss fight is so memorable because it kicked your butt, right? And like, and you feel rewarded because you keep on thinking, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I'm not ready for this thing. And then when you win, you're like, you get this different reward factor.
There is a absolutely amazing sense of accomplishment that comes with those games. But I feel like with Demon Souls or with the From Software games, there is a lot of punishment though along the way, and ultimately that just kind of makes the end result so rewarding. I will say though that just going back a quick second to what you were talking about maybe what also Nintendo thinks about in terms of experience, one trend I'm noticing lately more too is even with A Link Between Worlds, soundtrack, like music, timing on music is very, very methodical. Like there are certain moments in that game where I feel like, for example, the last dungeon of that game, the theme is constantly changing as you continue to progress. It becomes more heroic. It becomes more bombastic. It becomes more, more instruments get introduced. And I feel like that ultimately, like it really surprised me how much that moved me in that game, even though I felt like A Link Between Worlds was still a relatively easy Zelda to a degree. I will say this, though, back to also about sort of surprise and adventure. It did shock me that one of the last mines you find, you have to bomb a wall you would have never known to bomb. And I think that's the first time that's happened in a Zelda. And
you remember that now.
How long.
They used to do that,
I still remember that.
Wait, when did that happen?
Link to the Past,
been
marked.
Yeah, so there is one of the last Mai's you need to gather. Remember, there was like 100 of them. I don't remember the exact count.
There's an unmarked wall.
Yeah, there was an unmarked wall you had to bomb.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was just like, what? This hasn't happened in forever.
Link to the Past did that a couple of times where clink, clink, you get the wall, but they kind of dropped that element. They didn't do it very often afterwards. They always gave you the indicator, hook shot here, or
I maybe it was 2008 or so. Eiji Aonuma gave a talk at GDC where he explained. He talked about his sort of stewardship of the Zelda series and the challenges making Twilight Princess after Wind Waker, which underperformed market-wise, and he felt tremendous pressure to take care of Zelda, and I really felt for him, and I was really impressed by his candor. He talked about, he also gave a talk about the Miyamoto way of doing things. I just feel like I think he loves Zelda and loves his company and looks up to the people around him, and I think I think the people making these games feel tremendous responsibility, and they want to make something that lives up to the history and to all the fan expectations. But my read of it is that sometimes it's hard to be free and take risks, creative risks, when you have that kind of pressure on you. And I don't know if we're ready to talk about the new game, but I think it sounds like he's, I don't know, we'll see what happens, but he's talking a lot about taking risks. And in fact, in the Hyrule Historia, there's a letter in there where he said, I'm finally starting to think about how to put my own mark on the Zelda series. Maybe it seems a bit late to be doing that, but come along for the ride, or however you put it.
Yeah, and I don't, Nintendo has to create games that ultimately a really broad audience of players plays. And we see this with our wikis. We've got strategy guides on the side. We get emails from people asking for additional help sometimes when there's something not in it. And with Nintendo games, it does, like, you get the email from the grandma. You get the email from a grandma who's playing Wind Waker on the old system, not the remake now, and asking you for help. And you get a lot of kids too, right? And like, it's not easy to design a game that all of them can play somehow. Like, I wish they had embraced the kind of the difficulty settings a little earlier. You know, they really didn't do this for a long time, where they give you kind of a harder quest right from the get-go. They did this with Fire Emblem, obviously, right, where you can turn off permadeath now. And thank goodness, because if they had just kind of gotten rid of that feature, it'd be really frustrating for me as a fan of the franchise. Yeah. But I wish they did that with more Zelda games, because, I mean, falling into lava in Wind Waker and losing a quarter of a heart is bull, right? Like, that's just crazy to me. It's like, if I fall into lava, I want to be punished, sir.
Yeah.
Right?
I do feel though like Aonuma's mark on the series so far is Majora's Mask, which is surprisingly the one time he was put under sort of, I think, the most pressure they've ever had, because it was a year turnaround. They basically got a mandate, hey, we want to try making shorter Zeldas in shorter amount of time. Let's reuse everything we learned on Ocarina. But it did get out the door relatively within that year. And it had some really cool original, sort of ideas that they never have tried again to some degree. I mean, the whole mass system, has that ever reappeared in a Zelda? I don't think so.
No, not like that.
No.
And sometimes constraint, like extreme constraint, produces that, that you just don't have time to kind of indulge the tradition. And sometimes, like you're describing his love and responsibility for it, you'd like to think that would create the best product, but sometimes the things we love and feel the most responsible for doesn't mean we do right by them, or like we even, I don't know, it's just hard to kind of, it's a complicated feeling when you love something. And I think most people's love of Zelda is complicated, right? If you've been a longtime fan, then it means something to you. And yet, you didn't love them all equally.
That's right.
You grew older too while you were playing.
Yeah, and I got to say, I'm rarely disappointed by a Zelda game where, you felt very strongly about this, wrote this essay. Skyward Sword, I did not take to the art style. That was my first reaction. I'm like, I don't like this direction. Where, like, when Wind Waker came out, I was in love. I still love to look at that game, even though it shocked most fans at the time, right? Because they weren't expecting that. But I think it's really difficult to create these kinds of adventure games where it's like this item lock system of, slowly letting you get into different areas based on your progress in the story, and they make it very safe, right? They don't want you to get in trouble where you're frustrated, you put the controller down and walk away. And I think they should trust in their audience a little bit more, because ultimately what they have is something that feels so good. I think few people would give up, even if it was a little harder and a little more challenging.
Yeah, I think you even, like, it's interesting that Skyward Sword came out, like a month after Dark Souls, and Dark Souls was just beginning to explode into what it is now. But that's one option of, like, making the game harder. But if you just make the game, if you give incentive to come back, even if there is an increased difficulty, like, I think Minecraft, like, also, like, that game is actually, if you play the adventure mode, can be quite hard. Kids don't mind. Because there's something that draws them to it. There's a reason to come back. I mean, I think that's true of Demon Souls too, but it's also those games are very difficult and challenging. But there's an incentive to come back. I want to come back.
And I think the solution, though, to a difficult game in Minecraft is very similar to Skyrim, where if you spend time in the world, like if you're not ready to face an enemy, you can level up, you can become more powerful. In Minecraft, it's like you take the additional time to construct shelters so that you don't die, right, from enemy attacks.
You're careful, right? You don't just start digging down. Like, you learn rules that you don't,
And that's what everybody does, though, in the beginning, like that I love that kind of discovery, like where you get yourself into trouble and you fall into a pit and you can't get out, right? Like that. I love that kind of discovery element, and it is absent from the Zelda games. That's true.
It's interesting to me though, because thinking, and maybe I'm just overthinking this, but I feel like with most console game production, there is sort of a fear of the player is not going to finish this. The player is going to get rid of this game, or is going to walk away.
It's a real issue,
Yeah, but they don't finish it anyway.
No.
Do they?
Minecraft,
you never finish.
I
mean, in that game,
but
when I wonder if Minecraft dodges some of that. I mean, obviously because it's an independent game, but also because they don't have to deal with the expectation of like that budget and sales projections and all of that stuff. Like, they can take those risks.
That game was created differently. It's not story driven either, right? Like, you guys want people to finish your story and get to the point, right? And like, I feel like when you ask the folks making Assassin's Creed, like they monitor where everybody gets stuck, and they even put a mechanism in the game going like, did you like the mission? Did you like the mission? Right?
Yeah.
Rate us.
Really?
Like they want to know, so they get you through the story and ultimately give you like a satisfying ending.
Sure.
And like I'm sure the Zelda guys feel the same way. But they also, I mean, one other development in Zelda is the MacGuffin of giving you some sort of means of getting around. Also happening in Assassin's Creed, where it's like, it's a horse, it's a boat, it's a train, it's a bird, right? Like every game now seems to have this kind of special theme that they center the gameplay around. And like I feel like that development is risky because sometimes you're going to get the nice thing like Assassin's Creed 4 where the boat is freaking awesome. And no matter what you do next now in London, it's not going to be as cool, right?
Yeah.
And like, so I wish they were refocusing on something different, not just the means of getting around.
And it's interesting on that point because you take Wind Waker, which I guess we're all in agreement is a Zelda we all really admire, right? The way to travel around actually to some degree wasn't that cool. Like the boat itself, the King of Red Dragons. No, it's great in that it has a personality, but in terms of like actual use in combat, like combat in the boat is awful.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near as empowering as it is on land when you're young Link just dismantling enemies, taking their weapons, taking their money. Like you have this entire tool set, but yet somehow that game still manages to get around that being lame and ultimately be a much better game.
Because it feels like a free world, right? It feels like you can go to all these different places and explore.
Yeah, but it's not because the boat will turn you around in a second.
In the beginning.
Kills me. That's the worst, and it's just like that Bulger thing where the world looks like there's nothing there. You can see to the horizon. It looks like you should be able to sail there, but your boat just will decide this isn't the right time for you to go over there.
Yeah, that's right.
Gosh, you're betraying the system you've made, and you're just making me feel like I'm a child, like you don't trust me.
Yeah.
I think Wind Waker is very good at drawing you, like giving you that longing that when you see the landscape, it creates that ache for like exploration. It doesn't. I don't think it quite fulfills it. So it's a game that like I when I replayed it, I guess a year and a half ago when the HD came out, I was like, my memories of this are a little better than when I play, but then when I finished it, I still had good memories. It's a game that it sits with you very well, and maybe it's the charm of it or stuff like that. But I don't like most of the dungeons, and I think there's a lot of parts of it that are like, they hint at something great, like when you go under the water and you see underwater Hyrule, and you're like, oh, I want to go out there. I want to go walk around there. Or when you fight all of those moblins and stuff in the frozen castle, and there's like 20 of them in one room, and you have to figure out, like, that's the most exciting fighting part, and the fighting's really good in that game. So it teases you a little bit, and yet it's it doesn't quite do it, but it suggests that they have the
that
going
game,
on.
That was the beginning of me feeling a bit disconnected from Zelda because actually I remember you referenced the art style, which was very controversial when they unveiled it, and you loved it right away, right?
Same. Yeah.
Well, at first we looked at it and we said, "What?"
Okay.
Because you're like, "Why are they changing this?" No, and
what?
And remember, the first footage we saw was this horribly framed off-screen stuff from Japan too, right?
Oh,
like,
that's true.
and like you couldn't really hear it.
Well, they had this trailer with Link running, like hiding with the moblins, the really weird-looking moblins with the huge jaws swinging around and the lanterns, and he's hiding like with his big eyes behind the wall, and then he runs and jumps off the ledge and grabs the chandelier, and they all tumble off the. Yeah, it was like Looney Tunes. And I thought, oh my God, what is this gonna play like? What is this new Zelda? They reinvented it. That's fantastic because I was a huge fan of the N64 games because of the reinvention, because of all the new systems, the way it felt to do lock-on, the shape of the way you moved, like the way Mario was all like outward from center in any direction, just sort of scurrying around. Link had focus. You'd lock on, and then he'd do this like go around things, or if you just held the trigger not locking on, he'd kind of do a T shape, like back and forth, forward, back. And this was going to be a new way to feel Zelda and play Zelda. And then when they demoed it at E3, I remember Miyamoto showing how if you light a torch, light both torches, the treasure chest will appear. And he kind of did a shrug and said, as you'd expect, light the torches and there's the treasure chest. And I thought, oh, it really is just going to be just like Ocarina of Time again. And that's kind of...
There's a lot of torch lighting in Second Quest.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
That's something we can.
I hear you. Like, I I look back at every Zelda game that I played, except I own the CDI ones too, so I always exclude those. But oh god, but I look back at them and I remember them all fondly. And like there is definitely this repetition factor. Of course, when you experience them throughout your gaming career, they're sometimes 3 or 4 years removed from each other, right? And so like you get to this point where you really want to revisit this world and play this game again. Like Wind Waker, I didn't have an issue where I wasn't disappointed with the dungeons. There's some weaker ones. There could be a couple more in it, but ultimately I really loved I soaked in that atmosphere. Like it looked like Looney Tunes, but then it was really quite serious.
Yeah.
Like the fire temple with the dragon on top.
Oh
right?
yeah,
like,
Dragon Roost Island, and the music there. So
and they put you in those dark places with the kind of charcoal hues and everything.
Yeah,
it's
and
really
the game has
beautiful.
the best Ganon, like in terms of like story and character.
And the end, like right, didn't pull any punches.
Feel like there's that moment where you feel a little for him, like he's kind of got a raw deal.
Uh-huh.
You know, like the game doesn't usually entertain that notion.
No.
you know?
Yeah.
Why did he laugh at the end? Why did he laugh at the
Definitely.
end? No, but so I wasn't disappointed with that. And even with Skyward Sword, like there are all these things where I'm like, oh God, are we going to be stuck in an ultimately not satisfying village for like hours again before you let me explore? And like in that game you never really got freed. Like you can fly around in an overworld that ultimately there's not much to do, but then you have these little moments where suddenly there's in the sky area is this giant boss that you're fighting. And so what used to be just a matter of getting around is now a combat, a combat sequence, or like the repetition of that giant, weird, crazy, feathered-looking guy with the soft toes, right? Like it was just so weird. Like I didn't expect those things to happen in a Zelda game, and I like that.
Yeah, I think that's what probably made me more disappointed, because it had good parts. And so I was like, it was like the overall structure was frustrating, but like, it had, some really interesting dungeons. Like it had some great Kalaktos, the boss fight.
Yes. Oh, that fight.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it had.
I thought the world design, like the individual areas, in particular the forest and the mountain, to me they were a big improvement on the kind of just level design. Like you could go around. I mean, it was just interesting topography to run around, I thought.
And then it gets flooded, so you interact with it in a different way. There's,
Or you carry the device to see the past, right? Like it has a lot of good elements.
Part absolutely broke me. I will never forget, because I was reviewing the game for
notes or
well, the note part wasn't. It was the fact that in the story, specifically at that moment, slight spoiler, if you have not played Skyward Sword, please run away.
Cover your ears for 1 minute.
Yeah. You basically face someone who you saved before, who, according to the last time you spoke to the dragon lady, whatever she was, she says, oh, you're the hero. And then when you're confronting her for this thing you need, she goes, oh, that's so sad. And she breaks it. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? You know who I am. You know what this is about. And you're going to make me chase down these things and do this again? Like, that was the breaking point for me. I remember too, IGN's reviewer, Rich George, I dragged him in a room and I was just like, I don't believe this. This game's not respecting my time. This is absolutely like frustrating. Like, I don't understand why this feels like busy work. It doesn't feel like a game anymore. And it stands out to me. But meanwhile, a second ago when we were talking about Wind Waker, you guys just remind me another sort of curveball in the Zelda series, where when you go see Jabun, where you're expecting still that next dungeon, and he goes, no, you can just have the pearl. And I'm just like, wait, really?
But I think that was because it was cut, though.
It was cut,
right?
but you know what? That curveball to this day is still something that I will not forget, because I went in with a certain expectation and it completely gave me something else.
Yeah. No, and that's ultimately, I like those moments where the game does something that's different, right? Like where you're lighting torches and something doesn't happen that you expect, or like sometimes they do these moments too where you think you get the treasure chest and then brum, like something closes and you can't get to it. I love those moments, and I wish they approached the next game with some of those conventions in mind and just played completely against them. So they, somebody who's new to the Zelda franchise would never know, but all us returning players would go, what are you doing?
Right. No, for sure. Yeah. I do want to, before we move on to talking about the next game, though, I do want to wrap up a little bit more about Second Quest, because I feel like we jumped into Zelda and then we stayed there, which happens on this podcast from time to time. So you guys chose to look for crowdfunding to get this book made. Can you talk a little bit about that decision and about ultimately the sort of support you got as a result of that?
Well, it was, I think it was Tevis's idea. I mean, Kickstarter is incredible because, we were doing this thing on our own and trying to figure out how far we could take it. and it started to enter our minds that it could be longer. It could be a graphic novel. And we thought, well, how are we going to possibly cover our time to do all that?
Mm-hmm.
And, the fact that we could go to the internet and ask people, if you think this is a good idea, let us know and we'll do it, was amazing. And so heartwarming, the outpouring of support and everybody tweeting it and everything. So it's incredible. And all those people allowed us to make this. And now we can, we have a story and we can share it with people. It was also just put us in this position of feeling incredible responsibility to deliver.
Couldn't screw this up, yeah.
No, and in a way that was intentional, at least for me, that I wanted to make sure I would have to finish this.
Yeah.
So that was part of the concept, that if we go out and tell everyone we're going to do it and they give us money, we will have to finish it. Now, we know that a lot of Kickstarters don't finish, actually. But I think it's just in our personalities that we were not going to let this go.
We decided this was 2012, so it was a little before the Kickstarters had started to disappoint people, and so we didn't really cross our mind that we wouldn't finish it. We knew once we got locked in there that we had no choice, and it's really hard to finish things. So that was a necessary constraint for us.
Yeah. Were there any sort of roadblocks along that creative path, like in terms of either parts of the story that you had to cut, or certain sort of either layouts or ideas that ultimately you just decided this just isn't going to work out?
Well, it definitely took longer than we expected. We were about over a year late in delivering, and
so it took about twice as long.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, and so even then, we had never worked together before, and so writing and doing the layouts for the pages, it's a different way of creating the story. It was a 50-page kind of idea we pitched for the Kickstarter. It's over 100 now. And there were plenty of ways that we just knew we couldn't, to pursue a storyline idea is, so many more pages to we just had to constantly kind of, I don't know, make those hard choices of okay, we got to stay focused on what we can do. And so, yeah, basically whenever we would work, we would talk and have all these ideas, and then we would contract and pull it back, and then we would get it was just kind of this constant motion of that until we got
to I mean, it was a very challenging process, and we'd never done this before. Tevis had written fiction, and he's very thoughtful about video games, and there was the kind of critical content we wanted to get into the story that I knew he would have a lot of gravitas or weight or something into the thoughts behind it. And I've done comics, but I've never done a graphic novel, and I tend to do comics. My previous comic I mentioned, A Lesson Is Learned, was different from episode to episode, and we had this gleeful restlessness that we'd always change it. So to do a story that was consistent from beginning to end over this kind of scope was just very intimidating and imposing. And so kind of every stage as we moved through the creative process was scaling another wall, I think.
And we've also wanted it to we started with Zelda, but we wanted to go beyond that. We wanted to talk about Zelda and talk about, games more generally, but also some of the critical aspects of this are not just about Zelda, the games, but about the way we play games and, what we're looking for in games. And so gaming culture is very, much more diverse than it appears on the surface, but it's also something that, as we've seen in recent years, as kind of crises bubble up and things that were there below the surface come up, we were kind of trying to grapple with some of that, all along. So we were thinking about the way fans of the series and, the way that we all want more from games, and yet we don't know how to ask for that, or we don't. Yeah. So, we were also just, I guess, wanting to keep it not just focused only on Zelda, but to get a little beyond that. Since you guys have read the story, we were looking for a little more kind of real world resonance with something that is not just about gaming, but games and life are totally connected. They're not separate worlds. Yeah. So if we're doing some stuff here that's gaming, we really wanted it to resonate with our experiences outside of that.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, I think it's great that stories like this exist, and we know game designers are inspired by books and comics and movies, and it'd be awesome to for some of these elements to find their way back into games. I mean, I love Groundhog Day stories, right? And I love the concept that you could have a hero who maybe doing something for a terrible reason over and over. You know, like Shadow of the Colossus was a game that really resonated with me, where I'm like, wait, no, I can't, I shouldn't do this, but I have to, right? Like the game tells me I have to, so I have to do it. But you know, like life tells you no.
Right. We still remember Shadow of the Colossus, 10 years later, because of the sadness we felt while killing something that was, beautiful and grand and didn't necessarily do anything. Yeah. But, most, tons of video game narratives just don't want to really go there. Yeah. Like they want clean deaths, not ones that, make you feel bad or make you feel like not a hero.
The bad T-Rex doesn't have babies at home. Right. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it ultimately dawns on you in that game, especially that you don't know why you know an overall purpose why you're doing this, but you're not entirely sure why you're doing this to a degree. And I think 2 or 3 bosses in, it dawns on you, and you go, wait, what is this really about? Why am I getting darker after every one?
Right. How cool would that be though if Link became aware of kind of like the repetition of the storyline and said, I don't want this, right? Like, I don't want to do this, or Zelda.
Right. It was almost like Skyward Sword played with that. And I think that the series, as it's gone on, there's a point when Zelda, like, apologizes to Link for, like, manipulating him into, like, being the hero and stuff like that. And the game, it's like, it kind of acknowledges it and then moves on, you know? And there's this, the series is so aware of its own history that it's aware, but it doesn't, I don't know if it always acts on that awareness, and it would be cool to have a Link that, just was grappling with the echo, the repetition.
Yeah.
Okay. So then let's move forward to talking about the next Zelda, which Nintendo has been clear will not be at E3, which is very sad. Very, very sad. If you heard the episode where we talked about it, I was devastated because it's something that last E3, 30 seconds of footage made everyone just light up.
Just him standing there.
Yeah, and then he moved.
And then he moved for a brief second.
And everyone sort of said, wow. And then the promise of sort of an open world and what that can possibly mean for Zelda. Because it never really, I don't think it dawned on me, at least until that moment, that those worlds were never really open, that they were sort of contained spaces to a degree. Wind Waker, actually, as you brought up earlier, had the promise of it, but didn't really deliver that. So then what are our hopes for this open world Zelda, right? I feel like maybe we've been hinting at it a little bit as we've been talking this entire time. But what do you ultimately want to see them do?
Well, for starters, I think they're on a good path with Link Between Worlds, in my opinion. My girlfriend Sean and I started playing it at the same time. We got our copies. We were very excited. We went to a restaurant and had a cheap dinner and sat there in the booth and both started playing. And within a few minutes, we were in different parts of the world doing different things. Yeah. And I said, how'd you get the running boots already? She said, I'm not telling you. You have to figure it out. So we were just doing it our own way, and it was so exciting. If you can do that, if you can go off in your own direction, get lost, have a different experience from someone else, maybe replay the game and do it a totally different way. That's fun.
Yeah, David and I disagreed on A Link Between Worlds because he liked it much more than I did. But I think...
Why is that? Just in one sentence.
Well, just because to me it was like baby steps. It was like, great, we can rent the items. Great, it's a little out of order. It's still so much linked to the past for me, and it's very smooth and feels good and stuff like that. But I just...
Too seductive for you. Too reassuring.
I like Link to the Past.
No. So anyway, I think along those lines that for me, I really need to relearn the world. So even though yes, you could say that A Link Between Worlds kind of mixes things up and put things out of order and stuff, it was still, I kind of knew how everything worked, and so I don't like to know. It's one thing to have an open world where you can go anywhere. That's possible. There's many games that do that.
That's right.
It's that I want to go to somewhere and say, oh, that's a dungeon I'm gonna do later. Oh, I don't want to be able to read the world. I've often written about mystery and wanting something that really, when you look at a world, you have all these feelings about going into it and what's over there, and I guess I just kind of want to learn the language of Zelda again, and that's a more radical that's obviously asking a lot because of the iterative process of games but there's something about that language and the way that I read it that I want to be able to get lost and not just get lost because there's not like, you know, a helper or a little signpost, but also get lost like, I don't know, like I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I mean, that's not usually something that people like look for in games. I want to not know what I'm doing. Usually you want to feel good about what you're doing, but you know, some of my most powerful game memories, I remember when I was younger, I played Ultima 5, and I never really got very far in the game, but I accidentally went into the underworld and started following a river, and I just got totally lost. And it was an overwhelming feeling of, you know, like experiencing a world, and it was terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a game, but it stays with me till this day. And so if I could have anything, you know, like, you know, get in over my head and have to get my way back out, and I don't know, not even, I want secrets to be secret. I mean, that doesn't sound like to me much to ask, but you know, that a secret actually be secret. But Zelda games don't have many real secrets. That's why you remember the wall that didn't have a marker, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So those are the kind of rules I would love to like relearn in a game and really kind of feel like it was an adventure. Yeah. I mean, I come back to that word because I don't get that in games very much. Sure. I kind of know how everything works.
If they can introduce new systems that they don't understand initially, and you have to really learn the rules of the world again, then it would feel.
I don't want a skill tree. I don't want like a collecting mechanic here. I don't want an upgrade system. I know what those things are.
Yeah.
You know.
That's interesting.
No. Oh, were you going to respond?
No. It's funny because like we sometimes talk about Destiny because Jose always wants me to play it.
I do, even though it's a difficult game to get people to play sometimes.
I've played too much, but you know, Destiny to me had a couple of elements where I didn't understand what was going on. I'm like, why are there lights in the sky, and I gotta cleanse myself so I can see, and like
I remember this conversation very well.
But it was like. I love it when I can figure something out and I understand it, and I'm not standing there going like, okay, this is alien technology. I just gotta suspend disbelief and just that's just how it works. Like, it bothers me. I need to explain the world, but I do like it in games when you open a door and it's the inside of a volcano and you go in and you're losing hearts, and I like it when that is not just a locked gate where you can't do anything, where you can actually inch forward and you can get to the treasure chest and you're like, yes, I got something, and you kind of feel like you tricked the world. The world doesn't want you to be there, but you can get in. Or you dive and I can't dive far enough and I'm losing hearts, but I still make it. That's the stuff I love. And like, if they open up the world to let you use your limited abilities to get something,
it feels
and
like
then more later,
a little bit, right? Because I feel like the problem is when you play in a Zelda world, the Zelda world has a god.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe we can call him like whatever. There's a god.
It has three gods.
Miyamoto.
And you can feel the presence of the creator at every turn, right? You can feel that. Whereas like I want a world that feels like it has no god in games. You know, one where there's nobody in charge, and you know, chaos. That makes a world. Well, it just makes the world feel real in a way that it doesn't just feel like a designed clockwork thing I'm going to just go through. Instead, it's like, what the hell?
So wait, does Demon's Souls have a god?
Well, the truth is, Demon's Souls delivers in many ways. It doesn't have an open world, and it feels designed, very designed. So I don't think it really does that. I think that its design, you know, gets in you like your nervous system in a way. And I you know, I really like when a game makes me sweat, when it makes me feel dangerous feelings, you know, like when I'm feeling like rattled or something. And I guess Zelda has not done that for me in a while. I feel like very like, nice, you know.
Yeah.
But do you like those moments like in the Souls games, and it happens in Destiny too, where you figure out a way to beat an enemy, but you're kind of beating their AI, or you're standing on top of something and they can't quite get to you, and they walk around and bump into walls? Like, do you get satisfaction out of that? Because like I can see that element too. There are a lot of players who are like, no, that's part of the game. You know, that's not a bug that I can safely kill this enemy. I figured out this game world, and I'm winning.
I think anything in the game is fair. Like they made the game the way it is. So like if that's possible, you know, if you're playing with someone else, I think then you bring in like, you know, in a fighting game, like what's fair and stuff, and that's between you and the other person you're fighting. But when it's just you in a game, if it's permissible, like I don't, you know, I don't know. I think like in like Demon Souls, you use the environment to your advantage. You go for any advantage you can get.
Yeah.
You know, you were just like tooth and nail. You were trying to like get somewhere in there. So like you do what you got to do, and I like that desperation. Most games, you know, if I figure out the best technique or something, then it's like somebody else already did that, and I'm just following in their footsteps.
And
I want to go my own path.
Yeah, and it becomes the only technique, which ultimately then takes away from it.
Right. Then you just start repeating what works.
Yeah.
And
I do have hopes that with the next Zelda being open world, that open world impacts Zelda in a way that maybe nothing has before. It's funny because just more recently I've been a bit more acquainted with open world games. I started playing Xenoblade X, which is out in Japan, and that, you know, there is sort of a thrill to ending up in areas you're not supposed to be, because you'll look around and be like, man, that monster is a level 80 something, and if it turns around right now, I'm done. Like there's nothing that can save me. So there is a thrill to that. But something it has that this open world with Zelda has me thinking a lot about is just the notion of side quests and the notion of a second quest, something that's not just that main story path, and how will Zelda adapt to that? Because I feel like when I look back at the other Zeldas, the side quests were sort of mini game-ish. They were, you know, if you take Majora's Mask, there's like, you know, the carnival games you play, or there's the occasional win a horse race against someone. And they still feel very gamey. Yeah. Like it doesn't feel like it's an adventure or that you're a hero. It just feels like, well, I have to do this thing to ultimately get a prize that I'm going to need somewhere else. And that's not to say they're not entertaining. I feel like they can be, but I just wonder if Zelda Wii U, NX, whatever you want to call it, will inevitably explore the notion of what it means to be like a hero in this big world, you know, because I feel like every game is framing that to a degree, that you are the hero and that you are going to save everyone, or you're the hero no one ever heard of. Yeah. In most Zeldas, you are. Like no one really recognizes.
You're not the hero of Kavach.
Yeah, the Kavach. You know about the hero of Kavach? But I mean that I just hope that somehow that sort of builds into it. And some people would say, well, I want Skyrim. I want Zelda to be more like Skyrim. I kind of don't want that to a degree. Like I'm one of the few Skyrim haters on this planet.
Really?
Actually, yeah.
I'm not fond of Skyrim either.
I love Skyrim, but I also like a Zelda world that has a bit more scripting. Like I am fine with like the Majora's Mask's the story quests where you follow someone and they do the same thing every day. Obviously in the narrative that's how it works with a 3-day setup, but I do like that there's a little bit more structure to a character doing something. You can figure out what they do versus Skyrim where quite frankly I can accidentally kill someone in town. I'm like, oh no. You know, like,
and that has consequences.
I know, but that bothers me.
That has straight up consequences. And I think there is one quest, in Majora's Mask that does reflect that a little bit. It's the Lover's Quest.
Yes.
That you have to sort of piece together what happened and then come to his rescue. That's probably one of the few side quests I can think of off the top of my head. And maybe it's just because it's one of the most recent Zelda I've played, but where I felt like, wow, this was dark and this was different and this was, you know, there was true love at the end and all this stuff.
But even in that game, even like when the letter gets delivered to the girl in the inn, right? Like just witnessing the exchanges between the characters, like seeing the postman arrive or seeing the Goron arrive and ultimately you stealing his room, like all those interactions were really clever. Yeah. Those would be really difficult to do without scripting. I mean, either they're a cutscene like in a game like Skyrim, like some guy walks in and does it, or you know, you wouldn't even notice that was going on.
Yeah,
you know, whereas like Majora's Mask pulled that off really well, and I want more of that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, and I do like your point because scripting ultimately helps a lot of that work to a degree, and it is hilarious that then you can take that letter and turn it into toilet paper for the hand in the bathroom. Like just go here you go, goodbye.
But doesn't the scripting work in Majora's Mask because of the repetition of days?
For sure.
So you understand it in the context of time travel and all that kind of stuff. When it's in a game and there you can feel the scripting, but it's just like happening right now, and then the fakeness comes out, then the kind of like unbelievableness of it.
For sure,
So something about Majora's Mask structure that really allows that to have meaning in a way that you would get annoyed.
Actually, that's a great point because of that structure of 3 days, you ultimately discover that some characters who are in a certain place on day 1 aren't necessarily on day 2 or day 3. Like it does radically change the way that works, but then you can just go back to the start. I bring this up too because when we last saw Zelda, they showed, you know, sort of that map on the gamepad, and it was a clock there, and I'm just like, well, why is that there? Why do I need to know what time of day it is? Like, what does that ultimately mean? I have to go speak to someone at a certain time and sort of discover things that way? Are they going to lean on that or not?
I mean, I'm assuming there's scripting related to day like time of day. Because they said big enemy, you may encounter big enemies in the overworld, and I got a feeling like Nintendo doesn't leave anything to chance. They want that battle to be perfect, right? And so they're gonna make. I think they will have more of that kind of scripted encounter feeling, so they feel like meaningful, well-constructed boss battles. But we don't know yet if there is a MacGuffin in this game, right? Like whether you're the little train driver or the bird flyer or whatever, right? Like there may be an element to it. There could be a Link to the Past type element. Hopefully, they're not repeating themselves. I mean, I was disappointed a little bit when I saw the overworld at first. I mean, I love the look and the art style, but I felt like it was a little empty. Like I wanted to see someone walk by. Like I wanted to get that sense that you're seeing a living world. But at the same time, you also didn't see hook shot here, target there, and all that kind of stuff either.
It's hard to tell from the footage because it was off the screen, and I delved into a NeoGAF thread that was getting pretty intense.
Cubic square inches per between each tree.
There are a lot of little things that people found in there, and they're starting to make inferences about the world and almost like spoilers. Like, oh my God, how did you figure that out? But yeah, I think it's hard to tell from the footage.
It's always hard to tell. Like we've been watching, previews of games all our lives, and we have this whole imaginative relationships with previews, right? And then usually within 10 minutes of actually starting the game, and you're like, oh, I see what it's doing. You can put it into the familiar genres and frames, whereas when it's a preview, it still seems kind of like maybe it'll like radically change my world, because we've had a few games that when I finally played them, like Mario 64, it like radically changed my, oh my God.
And that actually happens more often than you think. Like if you think back to the kind of jump and climb games a la Tomb Raider, where when you're hanging from a ledge, you can go left or right, and then you can climb up. And if you saw an edge or a wall, that automatically meant you couldn't go any further. And like it wasn't until, I forget if it was Prince of Persia probably, where you could then go around the corner. Everybody's like, oh, of course you can go around corners when you're hanging on a ledge, right? Like all those little things changed over time.
You're learning to read the visual information and the world. You learn to read it differently.
And now it would feel weird if you were restricted from making those moves, right? Like it would be strange that you couldn't do that.
Yeah, the only other thing I bring up is the one positive thing for Skyrim that I would agree on is that because of the way it's designed, there is room for a lot of different stories, a lot of just spontaneous events where like I'm trying to shepherd this poor man out of a village, and all of a sudden a dragon shows up and he gets killed, and I'm just like, how many people did that happen to? Like it just feels like anything can happen at any moment. I don't know. I mean, I do want Zelda to have some aspects of that, but I don't. At the same time, it became very frustrating to me because of that. Because that one guy I was trying to get out of town, every which way I tried to get him out of town, he got killed. And I ultimately came up with, well, I don't want to save you anymore. I'm done with this game.
Nintendo will never make that game. Like, they will never make that game because they're so meticulous. They're like marionettes players, right? Like, they want to give you the kind of impression that it's a living world, but they don't want you to witness something that's broken. They don't want you to see behind the cardboard facade and notice that it's all strange.
You mean dragons that fly backwards or things like that?
I mean, in Skyrim, an encounter can be incredibly impressive where you see two NPCs squaring off and a bunch of wolves running, and you're like, oh my God, right? Like you witnessed an event. Or one of those wolves could just take off and fly into the sky. And that happens all the time where like the AI is broken and something happens, or somebody stands in front of you and just goes and dies, and you're like, what? And like Nintendo will never go for that. I do think they will always have a little bit more control over your experience.
I wonder if they would though let in a little more tragedy, because I feel like some of them, like it doesn't have to be emergent necessarily, but it could still be, something lost. I just feel like the game flirts with that sometimes. End of Wind Waker has a little bit of that melancholy, and there's, Majora's Mask for sure, and there's this, I don't know, it's like the hero's quest should have a cost. It shouldn't be like all success, Like if you the Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery game, you're getting weaker as you play. It's getting harder because you're losing hearts, and that's felt somehow, I'm doing something really hard, I'm getting hurt, but I'm getting like not just tougher, but I'm getting like more beat down, and I can't imagine them doing that necessarily for Link, but the idea that there's a little bit of heartache in this or something, just a little like human and memorable, and as opposed to just like total victory.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's
I think
kind of
that's
like that moment where you say goodbye to the grandmother's the shortest like sad moment in Wind Waker.
Yeah.
Right? You feel it, and then it's like, nope, you're back.
But
on
I think
this
we
adventure.
love Wind Waker in part because the faces are so good in that. Like it's the style, but like you get they are so expressive, and you just have a human kind of connection to this cartoon that is pretty rare in definitely in realistic games, because then you just that's not a face, So.
No, they did a really nice job with that.
Yeah.
I thought so
I've been
too.
thinking about what I want in the game, and I think more than anything, I want them to surprise us, and I want them to take risks and change it, and not be afraid of us getting bored too quickly, and not be afraid that we'll say, "Hey, the tunic's not green. That's bullshit. I can't play this game." And I've heard fans, complain about that, like, his tunic's not green. What's happening? He has a ponytail. Where's the hat? What's going on? This isn't Zelda.
But that seems to be
it might just be a small detail, but it might be emblematic of their attitude, that they want it to. They're going to change some things fundamentally and make you a little uncomfortable, and hopefully they'll carry that through. And I can certainly come up with a list of my own things I love that I'd love to see. But more than anything, I don't want to dictate. I don't imagine how Numa's listening to this and scribbling down everything we say. But I want them to just be like creatively healthy and take risks.
And Nintendo, I just think they can do that sometimes. They do. Like sometimes they don't listen to anybody, and we think like, what's going on with them? But I respect that. Like there's a downside to it when they're more conservative, or kind of like a little island that doesn't. Our book is about criticizing island mentalities.
Yeah.
But at the same time, sometimes you got to shut off all of the noise and all the expectations that are out there, that the internet just keeps in your head all the time, and not take risks with the audience. And I don't know, Nintendo can do that sometimes.
And
they have.
That's what happened with Wind Waker, and I was at E3. I was hanging out with some Nintendo folks when the reactions for Wind Waker were coming in.
Yeah.
And
Japanese or American?
Japanese. And there was the question someone said. Miyamoto asked, "Why are people not clapping?" Right? Like there was
Oh my God.
where you could easily imagine why you
So
could,
ominous.
but why you could imagine in today's date that a company like that would be shaken by that fan reaction, would say, well, maybe that's the wrong direction. Maybe we gotta add a grown-up Link to our story, and at least make him look cool and give him a big chainsaw or something, right? Like, and that risk is
Don't
out
do
there
that.
too when you instantly take in that feedback. So I'm always happy when a game comes out that is just completely bonkers and disregards what fans are asking for. At the same time, like, it's kind of tough to say that if you played the next Zelda game and that Zelda theme wouldn't kick in, just like with Final Fantasy, you want that theme to play. Like, I'd be a little sad too, if it was a complete departure from that.
Yeah.
That's a green tunic effect,
But
right?
maybe if we have higher expectations for the game, I think we can have higher expectations for ourselves, right? And our own reactions. And at first it might feel kind of like, but you'll probably keep playing, and then maybe after a few hours you'll feel differently. And I don't know. I feel like players are up for more than they say sometimes.
Yeah.
The reaction online is one thing, and the knee jerk is one thing. But I think players are more than they let on. Or they can.
Yeah.
I just think the conservatism is partly it's partly real, and it's partly in the air, and it's kind of like a contagion. But it's I don't know. I think people can do more than they say.
It all goes back to fairy tales and repetition of all
Yeah,
the
but
elements. It's
when
all
you-
Bettelheim based.
Yeah, but when you look at that reaction to then the reaction they got for Twilight Princess when they first showed it, and how people erupted, like it was just, and they all looked at it and immediately said, "This is what I want."
Yep.
And then it
And what do
wasn't
we say
until
now
later
about Twilight
people,
Princess?
people now look back on Twilight Princess and a lot of them say, "Man, this was Ocarina of Time again for the most
Right.
part," and this wasn't something that different. It was a bigger scale. It was different art direction, but it wasn't that different.
Sometimes we don't know what we want.
No, of
like
course
we think
not.
we know what we want,
No.
and then we get it and we're disappointed, or we don't get it and we're surprised, or
I mean, remember the reaction to Metroid Prime being a first-person game, right?
Right.
Like, it was brutal. The feedback on our site was so negative to the concept, and nobody could imagine that you could do Super Metroid in a first-person perspective, right? And, like, I don't know how you feel about that game. I really, really loved it.
I loved
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same.
I haven't played it in 10 years, but it was
Yeah.
amazing back then.
And that's, I mean, that's the kind of Nintendo I want, where they basically just say, all right, we're going to do something completely different and unexpected. And like, yeah, the reception may not always be positive, and then 10 years later, everybody says that was the best thing ever.
Oh, are you saying that about like Wind Waker right now? Is that what you're saying?
Wind Waker, honestly, I mean, no, we really liked the game when it came out. Like, we gave it a 9.7, I think, really high score. But like leading up to the release, like when you were talking with friends, you're like, oh man, video games are growing up. I wish I had a Zelda game that looked, was the most technologically advanced, good-looking, mature game, right?
And I was glad critics came around on it versus sort of the outright response to it. Like, I'll never forget the first line of the EGM review for Wind Waker, because it said, "What were we so worried about? What? Like, what was it? Because it's not. This is great."
Yeah.
You were gonna say, David?
Oh, I like how you put it, that we could have higher expectations of ourselves or something, that I think I'd like fans to be open-minded and like look at this as an artistic work, that and that it's not always about serving up a fast food meal that's going to be the same so you feel reassured. It's like they spend 5 years on this or whatever it is, and hopefully they're challenging themselves and they're going to surprise us. I think that's why people love Nintendo, because they take these left turns and do these weird things that we wouldn't have predicted, and they've influenced the industry so many times. I mean, they're among the best for sure.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank
this
you.
is a really great discussion.
Thank you.
Really happy to have you here. If you're interested in Second Quest, please stop what you're doing right now. Go over to www.secondquestcomic.com. You can pick up either an electronic version or order the hardcover, which we have a few. They're really cool. I'll put some photos up with the post for this episode. And thank you for listening to Nintendo Voice Chat. We are a weekly show on IGN, but we also have a ton of content on IGN, which you can come and check out after the podcast itself. We really could use, first of all, thank you for all your support, but feel free to email in. Let us know what you think. What do you want to see in the next Zelda? Let us know at nbc@ign.com. If you sent in NX predictions for last week's show, don't fret. Next week, we'll be talking a little bit more about that too. Since we had some guests, we wanted to respect their time this week. And lastly, make sure that you leave us a review if you haven't already. Head on over to iTunes. Those always help with visibility. Or email us your feedback at nbc@ign.com. So you can find us on Twitter. You can find Per Schneider at
Per IGN.
You can find David at
David Hellman.
You can find Tevis at
Tevis Thompson.
And you can find myself at Jose_Otero. Thank you very much for listening, and we will be back next week with more Nintendo Voice Chat.
Get the thing.